All right. The last time these two gentlemen met up, Dr. Peterson and Mr. Spencer, for the most part, agreed. They had a debate on a radio station. Today, Dr. Peterson would like to ask Mr. Spencer a couple of questions. We'll take it from there. Also, afterwards, I want to open up the questions to the audience. There are two microphones in the middle aisle, and we'll have a Q&A session with the audience afterwards, so you can ask both our panelists your questions. Right. Dr. Peterson, you can start.
Okay. I assume this is on, yeah. I wonder if I could just respond to some things that were said. First of all, I want to stress, I am not one of those living in this fantasy world who thinks that Islam is peaceful right now. I think the Islamic world is dysfunctional right now, and clearly that the militant voices have the upper hand. They're winning. And the moderates, the people that I would like to see win, are on the defensive, if they're even doing that well. In many places they're simply silent, for various reasons, some of which are understandable and some of which bother me exceedingly much. I'm not opposed to Mr. Spencer's critique of Islam on many levels. I think it's sort of a bracing tonic, and I think there's much that the Islamic world needs to do to respond to the sort of critique that comes from Mr. Spencer. My problem with a lot of what he's done, I think, is not so much that it's wrong as that it's selective, that it's a prosecutor's brief, which has its legitimate function. But there's some things I'd like to say. I see my position, we're not really so much opposed here. You know, if this debate were a debate between polar opposites, you'd have someone arguing that Islam was intrinsically violent and someone arguing that it's intrinsically peaceful. I'm not going to argue that. I think that the elements justifying warfare are definitely there. This is certainly a very important part of the Islamic tradition, and it's something that Muslims need to deal with. My simple argument is that there's a lot of material there, and it's legitimate, it's in the tradition, that can be used by moderates. Yes, there is a broad consensus, and has been for a long time, about certain elements of jihadi teaching. I'd like to point out, though, that formulations like the binary opposition between the Dar al-Harb and the Dar al-Islam, the abode of war and the abode of submission, that opposition is something that dates really to about 2 centuries after the Prophet Muhammad. Much of Islamic law relative to jihad and almost everything else was formulated during the imperial period, an expansionist period. You can see the jurists who are doing this as the kind of hawkish, pro-establishment party. Giving any comfort to the enemy here. But this is the war party, and they're currying favor in some senses, I think, with the establishment, with the regime, by justifying what the regime is doing. But all I really need to do to demonstrate there are peaceful elements within Islam is to show that there are some out there. It's like trying to disprove the proposition that all crows are black. All I have to do is show one white crow, and I've succeeded. So in that sense, I've got a modest task here. Let me just go over a couple of the verses that are mentioned. For example, it's said that the Quran explicitly teaches never-ending warfare against unbelievers. That is one of the things I expressly denied in my opening statement. The Quran, you could read it as simply referring to the specific wars that Muhammad was involved in 7th century Arabia. To generalize from that to a state of never-ending war against all the rest of the non-Muslim world is not a necessary entailment of those passages. Now, that it has been the entailment for a lot of Muslims, maybe the dominant tradition, is no doubt true. But I think there are other ways of reading it. For example, the so-called sword verse, Quran 9:5 reads, "And when the sacred months are over, slay the polytheists wherever you find them. Take them captive, besiege them, and lie in wait for them at every conceivable place." But the references in that verse to polytheists, it's not just non-believers, it's polytheists. And the reference to the sacred months make it clear this verse refers specifically to the pagan Arabs of Muhammad's time. And in fact, that's how many early scholars, such as Muqatil ibn Sulaiman in the 8th century, the great At-Tabari, the greatest of the Quran commentators, died in the early 10th century, that's how they understood it. The verse that Mr. Spencer expressly quoted, conjoined with the sword verse, is Quran 9:29, which reads, "Fight against those who, despite having been given revelation before, do not believe in God nor in the last day, and do not consider forbidden that which God and His messenger have forbidden, and do not follow the religion of the truth until they pay the jizya with willing hand, having been subdued." Now this verse obviously doesn't refer to all Christians and Jews, but only to those who disbelieve in God and fail to forbid evil. Contrast what Quran 3 verses 113 through 115 says about devoted Christians and Jews. they are not all the same. Among the people of the book are a contingent who stand in prayer, reciting the verses of God at all times of the night while they prostrate themselves. These are they who believe in God in the last day, and enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. They hasten to perform good deeds. They are among the righteous. And whatever they do of good will not be rejected by God, and God knows best who are the God-fearing. So this idea that it's a blanket invitation to war against all Christians and Jews seems to me, even if many Muslims have taken it that way, seems to me one that you can construct a legitimate argument against. And I'm just hoping for the success of people who will make that argument. Sorry.
Thanks for the pen. So am I, hoping for the success of people who make that argument. But once again, my constant refrain is, in this, let's not kid ourselves. There are other ways of reading the Quran. Sure, I am all for somebody coming in tomorrow and making up a whole new way to read the Quran to eliminate the power of any of these verses and many others that we could quote to incite people to violence and to make them pursue a supremacist agenda against the West. But the fact is that the mainstream understandings, as Dr. Peterson has conceded, of these verses is not that way. We can make up pretty things out of the Quran all that we want, but the only reason to even perform the exercise would be to help Muslims to actually understand the Quran this way. And for example, you take some of the things that Dr. Peterson has pointed out, that chapter 9, verse 29 refers only, as he says, to fighting against those Jews and Christians who disbelieve in Allah. Well, since Allah is just the word for God, it might seem nice if you stop there, because you think, well, Jews and Christians by definition believe in God, and so that means they're only fighting against Jews and Christians who perhaps aren't very religious. But the reality of the situation is, it says, fight against the people of the book, that is the Jews and Christians, who disbelieve in Allah and His messenger. That is, the Jews and Christians who disbelieve in Allah and Muhammad. The Jews and Christians, in other words, who have the temerity not to convert to Islam. They are the ones who have to be fought. And that would be all those who remain Jews and Christians and don't become Muslims. This is validated by many, many hadith and many, many statements of the tafsir, the commentaries on the Quran, and Islamic law and history. It's very comforting, perhaps, to read. I can give you a verse you could use. That's chapter 2, verse 62, which says that the believers, Jews and Christians and Sabaeans, nobody knows exactly who Sabaeans were, but Jews and Christians we know, will go to paradise. And that sounds great. How wonderful and ecumenical. Until you read the commentaries, such as that by Ibn Kathir, who is mainstream accepted commentator on the Quran, and the Tafsir al-Jalalain, which is another commentary that is very widely accepted and respected by Muslims. And they both say, the Jews and Christians who go to heaven are the ones who convert to Islam. The bad ones stay Jews and Christians. I didn't ever say a lot of things that have been attributed to me today, but I didn't say that there were no peaceful elements of Islam. There are many peaceful elements of Islam. But the fact that the Nazis did social services doesn't mean they didn't incinerate Jews. There are peaceful elements of Islam and wonderful elements of Islam. Beautiful. I wouldn't have studied Islam all these years if there weren't so many beautiful and compelling elements within it. But here again, we can't kid ourselves. There are also violent and supremacist elements of it that do exist and that Muslims believe. And no matter how we may make up some nice ways to get around them, until Muslims worldwide on a widespread basis start formulating those same kinds of ways to get around them, then we're just playing games and making ourselves feel better. And what is it? What's the expression? Playing shuffleboard on the bridge of the Titanic.